Snow lays across the eaves like a slow, white breath. It gathers on the roof tiles in soft folds, slips into the hollows of the cedar beams, and clings to the ends of the eaves as if afraid to fall. From below, the hot spring at the edge of the Ryokan sends up a steady plume of steam. It rises, unhurried, and meets the lantern light along the path in a low, pale haze. The steam and the snow take turns, one warm, one cold, one visible as motion, the other resting as quiet. Together they keep the world outside the inn at arm's length. Inside, the innkeeper moves with a small, practiced choreography. She is a keeper of kettles and small lights, of futons and folded linen, of the quiet attention that makes a house into a shelter. Her hands know all the surfaces of the rooms, the ridged grain of the engawa, the smoothness of the tatami, the faint resistance of the paper in the sliding screens. She trims the paper on a lantern with careful thumbs, tucks a stray thread into the hem of the noren at the doorway, sets a brazier to a certain low, constant ember. The house answers in small sounds. The soft clack of the brazier tool, a kettle's thin sigh, the inevitable scrape of wooden sandals on the threshold. A cat, small and round like a warm stone, pads through the hallways and chooses the most obvious place to sleep. A patch of floor beside the hearth where the light pools. Its tail moves once, twice, then it breathes out and is still. The innkeeper watches it briefly, a smile at the corner of her mouth, then returns to her tasks. Outside, a guest's footsteps crunch. A muffled voice asks for towels. Somewhere beyond the bathhouse, the hot water keeps a slow, patient conversation with the cold air. Simmering, exhaling. Lanterns along the garden path spill a soft orange that the steam eats and remakes into pearly bands. It is a very small house of work and hospitality. There are sutures of attention in every corner. A pot of pickles left on the windowsill by the gardener next door. A stack of futon sacks folded just so. A little tin of charcoal tucked away for guests who wish to warm their hands. The innkeeper moves between the rooms like a person tending a garden of domestic objects, feeling with her fingertips where something asks for care. Today, the care will be both ordinary and necessary. If this quiet evening suits you, stay with us a little longer. There are more nights like this to come. The regulars arrive as if by habit and weather combined. There is an elder who favors the corner seat by the engawa. He has a face like split wood, lines that hold small winter stories. He brings, as he always does, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, slices of preserved daikon from his own cellar. He will unwrap them later, passing out thin, tart pieces with a nod and a private laugh. The gardener from down the lane appears next, boots carrying small clods of soil, cheeks pinched by the cold. She wears a basket of twigs and a small wrapped parcel. Nothing dramatic, only the kind of offering you bring to a neighbor. A jar of plum conserve, perhaps, or a sprig of evergreens bound with fine twine. A pair of apprentices arrive on the afternoon train, young hands stained with work. They carry small boxes of tools folded in cloth. A curved awl for mending, a spool of waxed thread, tiny brass grommets in a lidded tin, a plane that smells of resin. They are quiet at the door, eyes bright, wanting to be useful. The innkeeper encourages them with small instructions. She values the way learning takes shape in slow repetition, not lectures. There is also the carpenter, who moves like a measured sentence. He keeps his voice low and his gestures precise. People bring him things, a broken shelf, a door that wedges, a loose plank on the ngawa. He will look, consider the grain, the way the wood has taken on the weather, and then he will say what is needed. His hands are calloused in narrow bands, the marks of the plane and mallet. When he works, the sound is almost always a tempered music. The plane singing as it takes a shaving off the wood, the mallet tapping a small wedge into place. The innkeeper's house is the kind that holds neighbors, and so news moves between bowls of hot tea and the steam from the bath. Today, the news is a small, sharp thing. A tear in the fabric at the entrance, and a shoji screen at the bath that has begun to give under the damp. Either on its own would be simple to mend. Together they read as an invitation to the community to gather. She notices the Norin first. The cloth curtain, which hangs at the entrance between the outside and the inner corridors, has been a threshold for years. Its fibers remember fingers and days. A faint line of repair runs across its hem, where hands once stitched to close a gap in a season past. This afternoon, where the Norin rubs against the post, a thread has given up. A small triangular tear stares like a missing tooth. Enough of it is loose so that the wind can find its way to the inner recesses the house keeps for guests' bare feet and folded futon. The innkeeper stands with the Norin in her hands, feeling the cold that slips through the tear under her palm. She lifts the curtain to the light from the lantern, and the tear becomes an aperture where the outside makes an accusation. Near the bath, in the shallow corridor where steam tends to gather, and the paper screens slide wet and slow in their grooves, the shoji shows its wear. The paper has been patched before. There is a thin, visible frill where the moisture meets the frame. The lower rail has gone soft in a way a craftsman notices with his eye before his fingers. A thin hairline gap is forming along the edge. Water has loosened the glue that holds paper to wood. Not a catastrophe, but a tenderness that needs tending. Otherwise, the little breach will grow. For a small house, such things invite a pause. Repairs are not emergencies here. They are invitations. They ask for time, for the right hands, for small celebrations in the making. The innkeeper goes about the sensible steps at once. She lays out a cloth on the low table and brings forward what she keeps for mending. A coil of waxed thread, a small packet of replacements, swatches of cloth the color of tea leaves, a strip of fine oak the width of a coin, thin sheets of paper meant for sliding screens, a neat box of brass fixings. She places each item as if arranging a meal. There is a humility to it. There is food for the hands. Word passes through the house in the soft way it always does. A quiet call to the corner where the carpenter sits. The rustle of the apprentices' cloths as they unfold their tools. A nod to the gardener who sets down her basket and squats by the brazier to warm her hands. They assemble without hurry. The innkeeper pours tea into small cups, the steam from the kettle making another small counterpoint to the onsen's plume outside. Conversation begins in the precisely ordinary fashion of such gatherings. Who came in by the early train, whether the post had arrived, how the snow had held at the lane's bend. Then, as a sentence might, the talk shifts to the tear and the screen. Hands are offered. Tools are shown. The elder unrolls the preserved daikon, and there is the low sound of someone slicing bread. This is how repairs are made at the Ryokan, with food shared between tasks, with apprenticeship folded into practice. The apprentices watch the carpenter as he takes up the plane and looks to the shoji frame as a man reads a sentence aloud. He points to the soft spot and explains simply and kindly why the glue has failed. The steam, the repeated swell and shrink in the wood, the thinness of the paper where light had shone through for years. The apprentice leans forward, and the carpenter's finger traces the grain. "When you mend it now," he says, "think of how the light will come through. It is not only strength we want, it is the way the night will look after." They speak of materials with the intimacy of cooks speaking of stock. There is a stack of washi paper, translucent, smooth, with fibers that accept the glue in a particular way. There are small strips of oak for the lower rail, planed thin to sit snug in the groove. There is a new length of cloth for the noren, chosen because of how it will take the lantern light, showing the color without being gaudy. The apprentices peel back corners of the paper and test them near the lantern. One of them, a young woman with hands still soft, holds a sheet so that the light makes a warm square on her palm. They choose not the brightest or the plainest, but a sheet that keeps its modesty and allows the lantern and steam to play on it. Between the choice of materials and the first cut, there is tea and talk. The elder tells a story about a winter when the roof gave way to wind, and they had to rig temporary covers from scraps of canvas. It is a small tale about how people find extra warmth when they need it. It is not a boast, but an example of how houses and hands have always learned to keep each other. The gardener offers, by way of a practical aside, a suggestion about sealing the lower rail with a thin bead of resin, a trick her father used. The carpenter considers this and nods. The apprentices, in the hush between adults, unfasten their parcels and set out their awl and thimble. The cat winds between their ankles as if to approve. They begin in stages. The carpenter takes the lower rail first, selecting from his small kit a plane that fits his hand the way a pen fits a quiet writer. He planes the oak to the precise thickness needed. The shavings curl like pale snow, light and thin. He measures the groove with a practiced eye. He fits the strip, tamping it home with the butt of the mallet, listening for that small change in sound which says the seam is closed. The apprentice watches and then tries, her hands awkward at first, her strokes unsure. The carpenter corrects gently. Angle the plane thus, keep the body behind the tool. She repeats, and each attempt is less unsure. The wood sheds its roughness and accepts the hand. Meanwhile, for the noren, the innkeeper works with her own small rituals. She turns the fabric side to the light and runs her fingers along the tear. She chooses a length of cloth to patch from the swatches, one with the same weight but slightly warmer color. She ironed the patch smooth, not for appearance, but so the seam would lie flat when folded by the wind. She marks where the new cloth must meet the old, and where the successive folds will sit when hung. The apprentices are given the job of waxing the thread. That small task requires care and patience. Pull the length through a beeswax lump until the filaments are slick and quiet. The elder offers a thimble from his pocket. It is old, dented, used for decades of small stitches. He watches the apprentices thread. Hands do more than learn when they are given a tool that has a history. They set up at the low table, the lantern between them to throw a steady pool of light. The innkeeper takes the needle and brings it to the fabric as if to whisper. The stitches are small, precise. There is a rhythm that soon emerges. Pierce, draw, press the fold, knot the thread, clip. The apprentice's first stitch is hesitant. Then she settles. The cat curls its head, following the motion with a contentment that is almost audible. Time seems to gather around the work, slower than the minutes on the clock, denser with warmth. Outside the bathhouse, the steam thickens, and it makes shadows on the wooden slats where the lantern's glow meets the mist. The innkeeper pauses now and then to look out, to see how the repaired cloth will be read in that light. She imagines the new patch not as a newness that must be hidden, but as an addition that will carry its own small history. Contrasting, perhaps, like a mended favorite mug, showing where hands have loved something enough to keep it. There are moments between labor that become stories. The carpenter tells of a beam he once saved from being condemned. It had a knot with a crack that everyone said was doomed. He cut and scarfed and joined until the crack made sense as part of the timber's face rather than a flaw to hide. The apprentice asks how he knew where to begin. He shrugs and says, "You look at the wood until it tells you." The phrase is modest and absolute at once. The elder smiles, folds a piece of daikon, and offers it across the table. They chew and listen. The house listens too. The floorboards remember every footstep, and now the soft tap of mallet and the rustle of paper are added to that archive. At one point, a neighbor comes by the back gate carrying an oddman's box. He is the quiet sort who keeps a drawer of screws, nails, and small metal things ready for when a bolt is missing. He lays the box open, and there are brass rings, and an old leather strap with a buckle, and several small metal washers with the shine of careful cleaning. Perhaps these will do for the Norrin, he says. He does not presuppose. He has learned to offer. The innkeeper takes a small brass hoop and tests it against the cloth. It sits like a small promise. The apprentices learn then how to seat a grommet, how to make a neat hole with the awl, how to place the washer on the inside so the edge does not catch, how the action of setting it flattens the metal so the cloth will hang long and true. The carpenter works the shoji while the innkeeper stitches. He lifts the paper away with slow, careful hands, as if turning a page of a book. The frame is solid, older than some of the people in the room, but it is not immune to the long conversation it has had with steam. He brushes the old glue from the rail, and the apprentices watch the dust on the scraper. They paste the new washi with a paste the carpenter mixes to the right consistency, thick enough to adhere, thin enough to be transparent when dry. The carpenter smooths the paper with a damp cloth, guiding the air out from the center to the edges so there are no bubbles. The paper flexes and yaws like a young thing finding its place. When it is laid and dried, the light will lie through it again, but slightly different. The carpenter explains the choice of paper. Not too white, not too pale, a sheet with fibers that catch the lantern and scatter it into a soft, warm rectangle. As the work goes on, the household rearranges itself to make room for the tasks. Futons are fluffed and leaned against the wall for the apprentices to sit upon. The innkeeper sends for more coal to stoke the brazier, so the tools and hands can stay warm. The kettle, ever an honest companion, sings a little as it comes to a boil, and the innkeeper ladles tea into cups, passing them with the etiquette of small kindness. 2 hands, a slight bow. They drink, and their talk grows softer in tone. There is no hurry here. There is a deep sense that some things are better made slowly so they last. In the hour when the light begins to thin, the innkeeper decides to adapt the repair so it will be both practical and quietly beautiful. The tier at the Norrin's seam receives not simply a patch, but a small panel of translucent fabric across its top, so that lantern light can pass through even when the gate is drawn. The carpenter suggests adding a thin wooden rib to the bottom hem, trimmed so the cloth hangs straight against the night wind. The gardener finds a small length of dyed twine in her basket that matches the patch in tone. It would be a sober contrast, not a flashy rescue. The elder offers, with the authority of someone who has mended many things, that the stitches should be visible, honest, like the scars of a house. Make the mending part of the thing, he says. Do not hide how it was kept. They agree and proceed. The apprentices practice a decorative running stitch at the edge, while the innkeeper sews the patch with a slower hand. The carpenter sands the oak strip, and the sound is a fine rain of dust that catches under the lantern. The neighbor fits the brass rings with a quiet satisfaction. Each small action is reciprocated by another. It is not a single show of skill, but a braided work of hands. Outside, the snow begins to fall a bit heavier. It comes in small, decisive flakes that gather on the path and the railings. The onsen's steam makes a faint bell of fog where it meets the falling whiteness. The steam's motion is like breathing. The inflection of the night changes, as if the weather has come in to see what is being done. The lanterns suddenly look more set in purpose against the white. Someone pauses and watches the petal-like flakes land on a coat and dissolve into wet dark. The innkeeper feels a prickle of the cold and tugs at the collar of her jacket. As they work, they speak of other small repairs and stories. The elder tells how once, when he was younger, he had mended a broken musical box and discovered a folded letter tucked inside the casing. The letter was not to be read, he says, and that is part of the story's point. Some repairs reveal treasures that are meant to remain private. The apprentices listen as if each anecdote is a model for care, a way of being careful, because things may have secrets that are wise to keep. The gardener, meanwhile, reaches into her basket and offers sprigs to be placed at the shelves and tiles, simple greenery to keep the house smelling alive. There are pauses that are not empty. They are full of small, ordinary attentions. Wiping glue from a finger, testing a newly set grommet by pulling the cloth and seeing how the weight rests, reading the light that passes through the washi and nodding to each other at its approval. The innkeeper takes a step back and looks at the noren, now half mended, its patched section showing the soft band of stitching along the edge. It is not a disguise, but an addition. The patch will gather its own history and darken softly with smoke and sun. She imagines the way the steam will sift through the lower hem, and the lantern will make a new patch of bright on the floor inside. For a moment, she allows herself to think of the noren less as an object and more as a threshold that holds stories. In the middle of a stitch, as threads crisscross and the carpenter pulls the final shaving from the oak, a guest arrives. He comes quietly, carrying the small, careful air of someone who is tired from travel and happy to be warm. He has been here before. His presence is like the note of a familiar instrument. He takes his seat near the window, where the steam makes a steady pale blot on the glass. He observes the work without comment, as if he too is learning the grammar of the house. The innkeeper offers him tea and a thin slice of the elder's daikon. He accepts with a grateful tilt of the head. Outside, the snow has begun to lay deeper on the path. The innkeeper goes to the doorway and lifts the noren, now with its new patch, to test the way it will move when the wind picks up. The grommets sit snugly, the brass warmed by the innkeeper's hands. She threads a thin cord through them and steps back. The cloth hangs, quiet and dignified, a small thing transformed. The apprentices gather to admire the line. They remark not on the perfection, but on the way the light passes the patched area. The lantern's glow slips through and finds the floor in a new shape. They do not yet hang it for good. The carpenter recommends leaving it attached only temporarily until the lower rail at the bath dries fully. The humidity might stress the new joins if everything is set too soon. They set the Noren across a spare rod and allow it to billow in the draught from the open window. For now, it is a promise held in place by careful pins. At that moment, the innkeeper notices something else. A small warp in the Ngawa plank near the bath door, a board that has begun to cup with damp. It is subtle, only a few millimeters out of line, but enough to catch a slipper and to make a sound when the morning rushes in with guests boarding the early train. It is the kind of neglect that a house feels as an ache. The carpenter reads it the way a doctor reads a pulse, with a quiet, experienced hand. He holds the plank under the lantern and taps it. The sound is slightly different from the others. He nods, not with drama, but with the soft finality of a man who knows the next step. They make a plan. The plank will be replaced. They will sling the Noren up sufficiently to keep the draft from slipping under until morning. The apprentices will watch and learn to plane and fit the new board. The innkeeper will finish the tight, visible stitch she has chosen for the Noren edge. The carpenter says he will awaken at first light to finish the lower join by the bath when the air is cooler and the damp less mischievous. It is a small campaign of tasks, and the house seems to receive them like a patient agreeing to a remedy it recognizes as reasonable. The cat, sensing the day's work winding down, curls into a deeper sleep. The brazier drops to a softer glow as the fuel settles into a long burn. Lanterns are lit along the pathway so that the steam and snow outside can make a quiet theater of light. They gather then to share a modest meal. The innkeeper brings out a pot of rice, simple soup, and the elders' pickles. They sit low to the floor in the common room and lift small bowls, their conversation drifting from the day's labor to the smallness of gratitude. There are no grand speeches, only the soft acknowledgments that land like clean coins and are collected. The carpenter offers a small, wry remark about the stubbornness of wood, and the apprentices laugh, a light sound, adjusting to that kind of repartee. The gardener passes around a jar of conserve and tells the story of how the recipe changed when the rain fell early that year. They toast, mildly, with teacups, not in ceremony, but in friendship. Later, as the meal clears and the apprentices are shown to the futon rooms to prepare for sleep, the innkeeper makes her rounds. She checks the bathhouse door, pats the new paper where it dries, and at the entrance she pauses before the half-hung Noren. Lantern light falls through the patch and maps a warm square upon the threshing mat. The steam outside curls and touches the cloth in a way that seems like a blessing, though she wouldn't call it that. It is simply the approval of elements in agreement. Light, cloth, warmth. She places a small charcoal brazier on the Ngawa near the door, not for anyone's hands, but as a beacon. It is the kind of thing people in the village understand, leaving a safe hearth for those who might return late from work, a quiet invitation to the way houses protect one another. She fills a small pot with tea and leaves it on the low bench for any late arrivals. Then she looks up to the attic window where a thin, spare hourglass sits, sand slowed to a careful pace. She flips it with a domestic, private ritual, not to measure time strictly, but to mark the evening's turning. The sand begins to fall. At this point, with the Noren suspended between plans and the Ngawa board noted but not yet replaced, the night stretches a little wider. The carpenter's tools are silent for the moment. The apprentices rest. The cat breathes in rhythm with the brazier. Outside, the snow presses against the lanterns, and the hot spring keeps breathing its weather into the dark. The innkeeper stands at the doorway and watches the steam and snow converse. The way they compose a kind of music that only houses and those who keep them can hear. She feels the fatigue of a day made whole by attention, and the thrill of a morning's decisions hanging unresolved like threads waiting to be knotted. A sound comes then, not part of what they had planned. A stranger's footfall at the path, quicker than the afternoon travelers. It is the kind of step that carries a hurried purpose. The innkeeper looks up. Snow blurs the lantern light as if someone has drawn a veil across the view. The stranger is a figure wrapped in a dark coat, breath smoking. They pause at the gate and lift a hand to the latch. The carpenter sees the movement and stands, the mallet resting in his palm like a small, steady instrument. The innkeeper, with the calm of someone who has seen 1,000 arrivals, opens the gate a fraction. The stranger steps in, water beating on their hat. They carry nothing except for a small bundle tied in cloth, the sort of parcel that hints at a private journey. Their face is not unfamiliar, but not known. The expression of someone who has come because they needed the sort of refuge a hot spring Ryokan offers in a winter night. They do not ask for much. They ask, simply, if there is a place to rest, if the bath will be open for a brief wash, if the innkeeper might spare a towel. There is a pause that feels longer than it should, not of suspicion, but of the house deciding whether it will take this extra breath. The innkeeper's hand finds the Noren and lifts it fully. The repaired patch rustles. The brass rings sing softly. She smiles as she has been taught to smile in the presence of travelers, reserved, attentive. The apprentice moves to fetch a towel. The carpenter steps back and allows the innkeeper room to welcome. Outside, through the newly hung Noren, the steam and the falling snow slice and soften the lantern's flame into ribbons. The innkeeper opens the door and steps into the cold, her breath a small white cloud, and takes the stranger's parcel on her palm. Their fingers brush for an instant. It is a brief, human contact that registers in the room's quiet like a note in a long chord. The stranger bows, a small gesture of relief surfacing. Inside, the house rearranges itself again to receive one more. The bath will be opened. The new shoji will be given an hour more to dry. Someone will sleep near the back door to listen for the morning carriage. The carpenter finds a set of wedges and sets them at the ready for the plank replacement at dawn. The apprentices fold futons and practice the precise angle of the tatami tuck. The innkeeper returns to the Noren and straightens the hanging. She feels for the seam not with many eyes, but with the particular knowledge of a person who knows that a house keeps its stories in its stitches. They settle the stranger by the engawa with a cup of hot tea and a small bowl of rice. The elder slices another piece of preserved daikon and offers it, and the stranger accepts, hands shaking slightly from cold. Conversation starts slow and then finds a natural warmth. The guest speaks of a train delayed by weather, of the kindness of a shopkeeper who gave them directions, of a night decided upon a last minute. The apprentice listens as if absorbing not only what is said, but how it is said, learning the grammar of being looked after. As the night moves on, the carpenter checks the line of the plank and decides that it can wait until the early frost. For now, the house seems content with its partial mending. The Noren hangs like a modest proclamation. The shoji's new paper settles into place and the lantern light reads through it like a new page. The stranger's sleep is steady. The cat shifts but remains guarding the threshold of the hearth with soft vigilance. There is a hush that falls, which is not the absence of noise but a presence of care. The brazier glows like a small oblation, and the hourglass has almost emptied. The apprentices have gone to their futons, their breaths even and unlabored. The carpenter sits and carves by habit as much as need, a little groove in a spare plank, the sound measured and small. The innkeeper walks the rooms one last time before she turns in. She straightens the lanterns, tucks the spare futon under the shelf, and checks the little pot of tea set at the bench. She fingers the Noren's stitching, and then the edge of the new washi, feeling the paper's slight resistance. Outside, the hot spring keeps its patient conversation with the cold. Steam and snow perform together, and the lantern light limns them both in a delicate courtship. She pauses by the doorway and takes a breath, the kind that comes before sleep and after a day done well. The smell of tea, the faint tang of preserved vegetables, the resinous scent of planed oak, the clean metallic touch of the grommets, all of these are held together like stitches in a quilt. There is a small satisfaction, an ordinary joy in knowing that the house will keep, for a while at least, its promise of shelter. But the plank at the Engawa remains to be replaced at dawn. The Noren, though patched, will need final securing once the air stills. There is still a work to be finished, and the house holds that work like a patient breath. Outside, the snow lays on the lanterns, and the steam makes its slow, steady smoke. Inside, the innkeeper turns the hourglass over again, sets a match to the brazier for one slow ember, and goes to her futon. The house exhales, the night deepens, and so does the quiet. The innkeeper's last thought before she allows sleep to cover her is not a plan, but gratitude. Small, domestic gratitude for hands that know how to mend and neighbors who know how to gather. The house seems to breathe with a calm expectation, as if the repairs are a litany and the morning another line to fold in. In the thin hour before dawn, when the world outside will be most white and the onsen will look like a bowl of warmed glass, the carpenter will rise to finish the replacing of the plank, and the apprentices will watch and learn how a straight edge is made true. For now, the house sleeps with its half-made things like a person with a book left open on their bedside. A wind comes then, light enough to disturb only the top of the lantern flames, and with it a sound that does not belong to the house's ordinary chorus. It is distant and faint. The scrape of a wheel on snow, the measured crunch of footfall that is not that of a guest. The innkeeper stirs in her futon. She listens. The house, awake as a single, attentive organism, listens back. She moves as a person who has taught herself how to be awake without startling the house. The innkeeper slides the futon back on its heel, pads to the Engawa, and draws the screen aside. The world is a pale bowl. Snow, piled thick and clean, sits on the eaves and the garden railings. The hot spring, lit dimly by the stone lamp, sends up a low, steady plume that makes the air tremble. Steam hangs above the water like warmed glass. It trembles and then steadies, as if listening. The scrape she heard fades now into the hush, but at the path there is the faint, regular scuff of a carriage wheel, the small double thump of iron against packed snow. Footprints lead away from the gate, and then vanish toward the lane, purposeful and brisk. She laces her hands around a teacup left warm on the low bench, draws the breath she has learned to take before a day begins, and steps out. The brazier on the Engawa still glows its embers. A thread of silver curl climbs and dies into the clear air. The carpenter is already at work, a shadow bent over wood, his breath steady in the cold. He has arrived earlier than the hour stated. His coat is damp at the cuffs, his gloves folded back. He does not look up when she opens the door fully. He keeps his eye to the plank as if to coax a rightness from it. "Good morning," she says softly. He nods, as if the morning itself were a familiar instrument, and they are tuning together. The apprentices shuffle at his heels, faces wild of sleep but alert in the way young hands become when there is something to learn. One of them carries the new plank wrapped in oilcloth. The wood smells fresh in the cold, a resinous promise. They bring the tools out into the early light. A plane with a blade that rattles faintly in its body, wedges cut from a spare offcut, a wooden mallet with the smoothed dents of years, a small brace and bit for a pilot hole, a length of cotton cord, and a tin of brass screws that the neighbor left last night. Nothing showy, just instruments that answer to touch and eye. They set the board across 2 sawhorses, and the carpenter measures. He runs his finger along the edge, the way one might read a map. Start here, end there, allow for the swell and the shrink of wood that remembers being outside. His measurements are both exact and forgiving. He knows a living house breathes and will want to expand, and so he leaves a sliver of room for the plank to meet the old ones as an agreement rather than a confrontation. The apprentices watch, and the innkeeper watches them. Watching is a way of lending the work attention. The carpenter marks the lines with chalk and then uses the plane to take off a thin shaving. The shaving curls like the paper curls they have been smoothing, but heavier, soundless in its descent. He shows the apprentice how to hold the plane. Body behind the tool, pressure forward, eyes level with the cut. The first attempt is clumsy, the plane biting here and catching there. He corrects her hand with a thumb and a short word. She repeats, and the shaving grows more obedient. There is a small ritual to cutting to length. He checks the run of the board against the old seam, lifts it to the light, and taps it gently to hear if it sings with the house. The sound is not musical, but a way of saying the grain will fit. He marks the cut and draws the saw through. The wood sighs and the tooth leaves a white trail. The apprentices take turns shaving the edge until it sits snug in the groove. Each pass smooths the surface and clarifies the fit. The carpenter teaches them how to read the line of the wood, how a knot will resist, and how to plane around it rather than trying to escape it. "Meet the wood where it is," he says, "not where you'd like it to be." They carry the plank at last to the engawa and set it into place. It slides home with the small finality of something that is right. The carpenter taps, wedges into channels he has cut in the underside. The wedges push the plank into a slight curve that the house asks for, so that when weight falls upon it, the sound will close into a single, steady note. He sands the edges with a scrap of cloth. No machine, just the simple friction of hand, and lifts the top with a damp rag to see how the grain takes the light. The apprentices learn the lesson held in the practice. Care is a skill that trains the eye as much as the hand. When the plank is set, the carpenter steps back and surveys the engawa as if reading a room. He checks the door. It opens with a quiet, even sweep. He leans his mallet to shoulder, and then chooses to do one final thing. Using a small gouge, he scores a tiny groove at the plank's inner edge, the kind of subtle detail that makes a board sit with dignity. The groove will collect lint and not worry the foot. It is, the apprentice later says, the smallest generosity, and the one that will be felt by the clearest eyed. Inside, the innkeeper has finished the norin. It waits on its rod like a small new sentence. The brass grommets are seated and the cord threaded tautly through them. She has spelled the new running stitch along the patch in a rhythmic, visible line. Honest mending, as the elder requested. Lantern light catches the stitch, making a narrow river of shadow on the cloth. When she lifts the Noren to test it, the patched panel slips and settles with a soft, centering sound. She pins the lower hem with a care that looks almost like blessing. By the time the plank is firmly set and the Noren hung, the day is more than a whisper. The horizon paler, the lanterns still holding a glow that the snow will soon borrow. Steam from the onsen raises its hand to the morning, and the light catches it into translucent veils that float above the water. The repaired shoji has dried into a gentle tension. The paper now reads the lantern differently, and the wash of morning will give it a new face. The Noren, when finally tied into its proper place, makes a threshold that speaks of being kept and attended to. They do not make a fanfare. Instead, a small portion of the house settles into itself with a contented noise. A spoon clinks in a bowl, a futon is folded and leaned. Someone hums the first line of a song about winter and rice. The carpenter eats his breakfast of rice tucked into a small bowl, the apprentices following his example. The elder adds an extra slice of daikon to their plates, as if that will embed the lesson more surely in their bones. They take hot tea, and there is a lightness in conversation, the kind that comes after work done well. The neighbor, who had come in the night with oddments, slips into the doorway and watches, pleased as if he has been allowed to attend the small miracle of a good fit. There is one more thing to do before the house will declare itself properly mended. The innkeeper, with a quiet deliberation, goes to the lantern by the gate. She lifts its paper shade and smooths a corner where the steam had slightly bowed the fibers. It is a minor action, and yet feels as if she is giving the house a face. She relights the lamp's inner wick and adjusts the flame so it will neither gutter nor scorch. The lantern breathes red and contained, and when she steps back the light spills through the Noren's new panel in a clean column that reaches along the mat and pauses where a pair of slippers usually sit. Outside, snow still falls but softer. It has a hesitant character now, as if obeying the gentle law of the morning. The onsen's steam weaves through the trees, and the lanterns nearby take hold of it into columns of pearly smoke. These things, light and steam and the house's new seams, answer one another and arrange themselves into a kind of compositional piece. The innkeeper stands looking at it, hand on the gate. She thinks of the small decisions that turned a tear and a weak rail into a declaration that the house belongs to its people, as the first proper customers of the morning, farmers on their way to market, a messenger who will leave at the hour bell, come to take the early bath. The house performs its duty. It is warm, it is dry where it must be, and the paths through the tatami lie waiting. The stranger from the night before stirs and washes with the discreet attentions of someone who has been given shelter and accepts it humbly. He leaves a folded coin on the bench and a short note written in uneven strokes. Thanks for the warmth. The innkeeper tucks the coin into the cash drawer and keeps the note folded. She will press it into her drawer for the days she needs to remember the exact measure in which care is repaid. There is a small moment later, when the house is settling into its new day, that gathers all of them in the common room. The apprentices arrange the futons with a new certainty. The carpenter takes up his plane again to finish a small piece that will eventually be a new handhold for the bath's door. The gardener sets sprigs of evergreen into a cracked vase, and someone finds a ribbon of twine that ties them all like an exhalation. They pour out tea and share rice warmed in a lacquered bowl. In the room where the work has been done, the Norin and the Shoji hold the light in different ways now. The repaired seams have a presence like a small living thing. They celebrate in the minimal way that craftsmen and keepers do. A modest salute of cups, a brief chorus of approval. The elder raises his bowl and says simply, "It is how houses live." There is a laugh, not loud, and a companionable murmur. Each chooses a small piece of the day to note. The apprentice who found the right plane, the neighbor who had the brass hoops, the gardener's twine that seemed to match the evening's palette. These are all minor triumphs. They are the craft's currency. Work yields to care and then to rest. The innkeeper walks from room to room, her hands collecting stray threads and smoothing damp patches. She pauses at the bathhouse door and looks at the steam that makes a soft curtain against the first light. For a moment she allows herself to watch how the sun will strike the water when it rises fully. The onsen will become a bowl of mercury, and then a kettle of gold. She smiles at how small alterations to the house's skin make entire mornings different. Before the apprentices retire for their own chores, or the carpenter moves on to another job, they gather around the low table again. The apprentice who had first struggled with the plane now demonstrates a small join she has learned to make. Her hands are steadier, and the group watches. The elder claps quietly, the neighbor nods. It is a ceremony of acknowledgement rather than an official rite. The apprentice returns the applause with a modest dip of the head. She tucks her hands into her sleeves and looks as if she has been given a new place in the house. There is an exchange of small gifts. The neighbor offers a jar of preserved plums. The apprentice gives a strip of cloth she dyed with tea leaves. An experiment, she confesses, that produced a color like old paper. The carpenter hands the elder a curled shaving that he kept because he thought the pattern beautiful. The elder regards it with that look of someone who treasures the fact a person noticed. They are not ostentatious, these tokens. They are practical, ornamental, the sort of thing that will be used and then kept. Once the kitchen is tidied and the kettle quiets, the innkeeper goes to the bench by the gate and places a small pot of tea set there for late-comers, as she had last night. She thinks of the way the house collects people, those who come for shelter and those who come to give it. And she rests her palm on the Norin's patched seam, feeling the stitches warm from the sun. The house, she feels, has been made right for another day. There is still one small business to attend to. The carpenter has suggested that the Norin might benefit from a second, inner tie, to keep the lower hem from catching the wind at its largest gusts. The innkeeper takes a length of twine and sits on the engawa, while the sun lifts a little higher. She loops the cord through a quiet brass ring, and knots it in a way the elder taught her years ago. The knot is simple, reliable. She steps back and watches how it holds. The cloth hangs straighter, kinder. The morning moves on into the rhythm of a working house. Guests come and go. Travelers leave with bowed thanks, sending their footsteps along the lane. The innkeeper logs their names into a small book in a tidy hand, noting a request here and a compliment there. She moves in her choreography, tucking a futon, answering a question about meal times, laying out a small tray of pickles for a reluctant stomach. The repaired Norin stands steady, and the new plank keeps its small, honest song whenever a slipper crosses it. At some point in the afternoon, when the light has taken on that honeyed look that means the sun is readying its retreat, the house gathers again. The apprentices are asked to stand and watch as the elder reaches into his pocket. He pulls out a small strip of paper, browned at the edges, and lays it on the table. It is one of those things he found when he mended the musical box long ago. An old note, perhaps, half a proverb. He reads aloud, and the words are simple and careful. They speak of being kept by the diligent hands of neighbors. They sound like a benediction, and the room answers with content, quiet breaths. The carpenter cleans his tools with oil and a rag that smells now of cedar and iron. He shares a final piece of knowledge before they part for the evening: how to set the plane's blade so it will not cough when a young hand begins to push it. Then he gathers his kit and prepares to leave for the next job. The apprentices walk with him to the gate for a moment, carrying the smell of work. The innkeeper thanks the carpenter with a small bow. He nods and slips away into the street, his figure swallowed by the snow-muffled evening. As the light thins and the lanterns are lit, the house seems to breathe inwards. The onsen breathes as if in time with the lamps. Steam rises in measured puffs that the falling night accepts and softens. The repaired noren now hangs properly, and the shoji reads the lamp's glow as a wide, serene rectangle. The new plank at the engawa fits as if it always had been there, and the small groove the carpenter cut gathers dust and footfall into a gentle-maned little line. They dine that night with no ceremony. Bowls are passed. A pot of miso soup simmers with the turnips the gardener provided, and the elder offers a small toast. Not words of grandeur, but a momentary recognition of the day, the hands and the time spent. The stranger who slept the night before eats in the corner, his gratitude an ordinary thing that settles onto the table like steam. The apprentices listen to the conversations, and now tell small pieces of what they learned, the way people repeat a recipe to feel it more their own. There is a pause as plates are cleared. The innkeeper moves through the rooms, smoothing a tatami here, tucking the corner of a futon there. She checks the bathhouse door, sees the steam curled like a hand around the roof, and then returns to the lantern by the gate. She takes the hourglass from its place and turns it once more. Sand runs like a small statement of time, deliberate and unhurried. She sets it beside the kettle, and the brazier yields a steady, watchful glow that will keep the house's center warm through the night. Before she retreats to her futon, she performs the small, private ritual that has anchored many a closing day in that place. She walks the length of the inn once, not to inspect, but to breathe each room as it rests. She pauses by the noren and places her hand upon the stitched patch. The fabric is now the color of a summer dusk, not brand new, but adopted. Her fingers trace the visible stitches, and she thinks of the apprentice's first clumsy pierce, and how the carpenter guided her. She smiles into the memory of their hands together, and understands that mending has turned into learning and presence. She returns to the common room where the others settle into low chairs. The elder tells an offhand tale about a childhood winter when a storm forced the village to share bread. It is not a long story. It needs only to say what care did in a time of want. The apprentices listen, the carpenter's absence a quiet fact, and the stranger nods at certain parts as if he knew the feeling. The gardener hums softly now and then. The cat, which has been moving with them like a small warm shadow all day, curls against the innkeeper's ankle. There is a sense of the house folding up like a book when they finally part. The apprentices are shown to their futons. The elder stays, making sure no kettle boils over. The innkeeper takes one last look at the noren and the shoji and the engawa. She thinks of the plank yet to be smoothed at its edges, a final touch the carpenter will give in the frost. She thinks of the stitches and how they will stain softly with time. She breathes slowly, the way she has learnt to do after a day of work, and then offers the house its last small attentions. An ember banked, a towel set out, the kettle quiet. When she at last lies down on her futon, the room is dim and arranged like a careful thought. The onsen's steam keeps its patient voice. Outside, the snow settles in a quiet that is not empty, but full of the day's made things. She thinks of the way a house is an accumulation of small acts, the setting of a wedge, the knot of a cord, the choice of a paper that will catch light. Gratitude comes, modest and domestic, for the hands that came and the ones that left. If you are with her now, imagine the house breathing with you. Feel the way the steam billows, and let your chest follow its tempo. Take a breath in, slow and even. Feel the air move into the lower ribs. Hold it for a count of 3. Then let the breath out as if you were easing a ribbon of steam back into the onsen. Again. Inhale, hold, exhale. You need not count loudly. Let your body do this quietly, like tending a small flame. One more time. Breathe in and feel the warmth that lives inside the house. Tea steam, a brazier's glow, the soft body heat of a cat. Hold for 3. Release. Imagine the winter wrapping itself back around, but leaving the small circle of light where you sit. Let your shoulders drop. Allow the weight of the day you kept to fall away in the same order you set it down. Tools, stitches, shared bowls. Let your hands rest. When you are ready, bring the breath to the rhythm you sleep by, long and slow. The innkeeper does the same, and the house answers in the steady sound of water at the edge of the onsen, the whisper of snow on cedar, the faint settling of wood. Tomorrow there will be more to mend. That is the quiet promise of such a place. For now, the repairs are made, the thresholds are mended, and the lantern light keeps watch. If this evening soothed you, a quiet follow helps us share more nights like this. The house leans into the dark. Lantern light, steam, and snow compose a final picture. The Norin showing its honest stitches, the Ngawa holding its new plank without fuss, and the hot spring breathing a patient plume into the white. The innkeeper closes her eyes with the sound of a kettle cooling in her ears, and sleeps with the awareness of a person who has kept a promise. Outside, the onsen continues its slow conversation with the cold, and the Ryokan, held by hands and by neighbors who know the grammar of care, waits for the morning to come round again.